Wars don't begin when the first bomb drops. They begin when someone decides there's no way back. VARINHIPI. It didn't start with a full-scale invasion. It didn't start with a mushroom cloud. It started with a drone, a missile, or maybe just a line of code. No one agrees on the moment America officially entered the war with Iran. Some say it was after a U.S. base in the Gulf was attacked. Others point to a cyber strike that shut down an air traffic control tower in Riyadh. But here's the truth. Wars don't start with explosions. They start with decisions. Quiet, strategic, and irreversible. In this episode, we dive into what we at VARINHIPI believe was the real breaking point, not just the spark, but the structural collapse of the logic of restraint. Because America didn't just stumble into war, it walked toward it slowly, methodically, and perhaps inevitably. According to the U.S. government, the decision to strike Iran came after a deliberate attack on U.S. personnel stationed in the UAE. The incident was swift and brutal. A ballistic missile reportedly launched by an Iran-backed militia struck a joint U.S.-UAE military facility near Al Dhafra Air Base. 19 U.S. service members were injured. 4 were confirmed killed. Satellite imagery confirmed Iranian-made Fata missile fragments. Publicly, the White House declared it an act of war. The strike, they said, left America no choice. But here at VARINHIPI, we've been watching the buildup long before the missile flew, and we ask a different question: did the U.S. respond to war? Or were they preparing for one all along? In the weeks before the strike, movements on the U.S. side suggested something else was happening. 2 U.S. carrier groups had entered the Gulf weeks before the attack. Advanced THAAD and Patriot missile defense batteries were quietly redeployed to Qatar and Kuwait. Special forces teams conducted joint training drills with UAE and Israeli units under the banner of anti-missile defense scenarios. That wasn't defense. That was positioning. Even the media tone shifted. Major U.S. networks began referring to Iran as an active threat to global security rather than a regional destabilizer. Headlines used terms like ticking clock and showdown inevitable. It was subtle, but coordinated. To us, it didn't feel like America was bracing for retaliation. It felt like they were getting into position. Iran has been in conflict with the U.S. for over 4 decades. So why is now the moment America stepped over the line? From our perspective, it comes down to 3 converging pressures: regional power shift, Iran's influence in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Lebanon reached new heights. Their proxies weren't just surviving, they were shaping the battlefield. America saw its traditional dominance over the Gulf unraveling. The Israeli equation. After recent attacks on Israeli territory by Hezbollah and Hamas, allegedly coordinated through Iranian channels, the pressure on the U.S. to stand with its ally was at an all-time high. Washington couldn't afford to look like it was hesitating while Iran moved pieces across the board. Global credibility crisis. After the messy withdrawal from Afghanistan, after wavering over Ukraine, after constant internal political division, America's deterrence was in question. A strike on Iran to some in Washington wasn't just a reaction. It was a message: we're still here, and we're still the ones who decide the rules. Here's something rarely said out loud in American strategy circles. Sometimes deterrence traps you. If you spend years telling your enemies that any attack will be met with force, then you become a prisoner of your own promises. The Iran strike on the U.S. base wasn't unexpected, but it was public, bloody, and most importantly, on camera. Once the video of burning barracks and U.S. flags in flames hit social media, the question wasn't, should we respond? It was, how hard can we hit before it becomes uncontrollable? In that moment, the U.S. wasn't choosing war. It was choosing not to look weak. And in international politics, that's often the same thing. So let's ask it differently. Was the breaking point the moment the missile hit Al Dhafra? Or was it the moment America decided to turn the Gulf into its permanent forward base? Maybe it wasn't a strike that triggered war. Maybe it was a structure that could no longer hold, an empire that couldn't retreat without collapsing, a global system where perception means more than strategy, a world where restraint looks like surrender and escalation looks like survival. At VARINHIPI, we don't believe in easy answers. We believe in patterns, timelines, momentum. And from our analysis, this wasn't about one missile. It was about years of decaying deterrence, of political paralysis, of letting threats evolve in the shadows while pretending diplomacy would hold forever. In our view, the U.S. didn't fall into war. It walked into it, eyes open, teeth clenched, hoping the ground wouldn't break beneath its feet. But it did. The last time America entered a war like this, the world was told it was about weapons of mass destruction. That was Iraq. And we all remember how that ended. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. That quote, often attributed to Mark Twain, feels more like prophecy today. As American missiles rain down on Iranian infrastructure and another Middle Eastern war burns into the headlines, a chilling familiarity sets in. This isn't 2003, but it echoes. Because even though the uniforms have changed and the headlines have evolved, the psychological script, the emotional blueprint that moves a nation from restraint to war, remains eerily intact. And as VARINHIPI, we can't ignore the shadow looming over every new headline, every press conference, every so-called retaliation Iraq. To understand why the U.S. entered the war with Iran, we need to understand what it never fully left behind. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 was a defining trauma for American foreign policy. Sold to the public as a necessary response to terrorism and weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, the war ultimately revealed a much darker truth. The WMDs never existed. The intelligence was flawed, and the aftermath was catastrophic. But perhaps the most dangerous legacy wasn't the destruction or the cost. It was the precedent. The idea that the U.S. can preemptively strike based on imminent threat. Media can be enlisted to generate urgency and emotional justification. Public fear can override rational analysis. Fast forward to now. An Iranian-backed group launches a deadly attack on a U.S. base. The footage goes viral. The nation is horrified. Cue the same phrases, rogue regime, state sponsor of terror. They crossed the line. We've heard this before. What struck us at VARINHIPI wasn't just the violence itself, it was the rhetorical choreography that followed. Cable news anchors used words like surgical, limited, and proportional, just like they did in 2003. Pentagon briefings referenced satellite imagery, encrypted communications, high-confidence intelligence. And the phrase coalition of the willing quietly reappeared in a speech by a high-ranking U.S. official. It felt rehearsed, as if a war was being explained, not announced. Because here's the reality. In the post-Iraq era, wars are not launched. They are marketed. And the American public has seen this marketing strategy before. Behind every foreign war is a domestic context. In 2003, the Bush administration faced immense pressure to appear strong in the wake of 9/11. The narrative of fighting them over there so we don't fight them here became gospel. In 2025, a fractured Congress, low approval ratings, and economic uncertainty create similar incentives. A decisive strike, a clear enemy, a surge in patriotic unity. It's a pattern. And while the circumstances differ, the outcome aligns. Military action becomes a political asset. War becomes a unifying stage, and dissent becomes un-American. We've seen this play out before, and it cost hundreds of thousands of lives. In the Iraq War, traditional media played a critical role in building support. Embedded journalists, Pentagon-fed stories, and a 24/7 news cycle created a feedback loop of fear and justification. Today, the tools are even sharper. Social media algorithms amplify outrage. AI-generated deepfakes can simulate evidence. Bots and troll farms flood platforms with manipulated narratives. And yet the underlying mechanism is the same: control the story, and you control the war. We saw it in how the initial Iranian strike was portrayed not as part of a complex proxy conflict, but as a singular barbaric act. We saw it in how dissenting voices, those asking for verification, context, or restraint, were branded as naive, weak, or worse. We saw it in the flood of hashtags like Warner's Stand With America and Rash Strike Back Now. Polls after the initial U.S. retaliation showed over 60% of Americans supported limited military action against Iran. But what does that really mean? In 2003, similar numbers supported invading Iraq. Because fear is persuasive, patriotism is easy to ignite, and complexity is inconvenient. Few want to hear that Iran's actions are entangled with decades of covert warfare, economic sanctions, and regional power struggles. They want good versus evil, and that's what they're given. But VARINHIPI asked, do we consent to war, or do we simply surrender to the illusion of choice? The Iraq War was supposed to be swift, clean, just. Instead, it destabilized an entire region, fueled extremist groups, and cost trillions of dollars. Today, as American forces deepen their campaign against Iran, we're told the objectives are limited, that the end game is containment. But we've heard that before, and we know how that story ends, because the shadow of Iraq is not just historical, it's psychological. It shapes how we respond to fear, how we interpret information, how we define safety. And until that shadow is confronted, it will keep writing new wars in the same old language. At VARINHIPI, we believe true analysis means recognizing patterns. And when a government builds its justification on blurred evidence, rapid escalation, and emotional appeals, it's worth asking, are we responding to danger or repeating a ritual? Because if the Iraq War taught us anything, it's this. A nation doesn't need to be lied to outright. It only needs to be told just enough to believe what it already fears. And once that belief hardens, war is no longer a question. It becomes an answer. They told us it was a necessary war, that the missile strike on the U.S. base in the UAE was an act of such brutality, such provocation, that America had no choice. But here's a question VARINHIPI asks that few dare to entertain. What if the war with Iran wasn't necessary, but orchestrated? What if the strike was not the cause, but the excuse? According to the White House, the U.S. response was measured, precise, and unavoidable. American lives were lost. Iranian fingerprints were found. The world, they said, was watching, and Washington had to act. But acting out of necessity and acting out of strategy are not the same. We're told this was about restoring deterrence, that if the U.S. didn't respond, Iran and its proxies would only grow bolder. That American credibility was on the line. But let's pause. Since when did credibility become a blank check for escalation? Here at VARINHIPI, we've been tracking regional movements for months. The signs weren't hidden. U.S. aircraft carriers repositioned in the Gulf weeks before the strike. Joint drills with Israeli and UAE forces under regional security scenarios. Quiet deployments of missile defense systems to Qatar and Bahrain. This wasn't just preparation. It looked like positioning. And here's the thing about strategic positioning. You don't move pieces unless you're ready to play. So when the strike came, the board was already set. Ask yourself, what changed? Iran has backed proxies for decades. The U.S. has been targeted before, yet never has Washington responded with this level of force and direct engagement. Why now? Is it because this attack was different, or because the political timing was perfect? In 2025, with internal divisions, a looming election, economic instability, and questions about global leadership, a war might seem like a reset button. History shows us this pattern. When a government needs unity, it often finds an enemy. Let's revisit a phrase that rarely gets airtime anymore. Manufactured consent. Coined by Noam Chomsky, the term refers to how democracies engineer public approval through narrative control, emotional manipulation, and selective truth. And when we look at the days leading up to the U.S. strike, the model fits. Mainstream outlets shifted tones, simultaneously portraying Iran as increasingly irrational. Leaked intelligence reports appeared across major news networks. Think tank analysts filled the airwaves with talk of thresholds and crossed red lines. It felt choreographed, scripted, and what better way to justify force than to paint restraint as weakness? But here's where we want you, the viewer, to think critically. How often do you see multiple media outlets tell the exact same story in the exact same words at the exact same time? And what does that signal? Let's look beyond the headlines. Who gains from this war? The military-industrial complex. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman stocks surged within 48 hours of the U.S. strikes. Defense contracts for new missile systems were fast-tracked. Political establishment A, divided Congress, suddenly found something they could agree on. War. Rhetoric of defending democracy replaced discussions on inflation, debt ceilings, and healthcare. Energy sector oil prices spiked, and U.S. domestic production was reframed as energy independence for national security. Strategic allies Israel and Gulf states welcomed U.S. escalation as a reassertion of American dominance in the region. When that many power centers benefit simultaneously, one must ask, was this a response or an opportunity taken? Media has never been neutral in war. In Iraq, it embedded reporters with troops, showed explosions on loop, and rarely questioned the rationale. In 2025, it's faster and more immersive. Drones capture the impact in real time. AI-generated graphics visualize threat corridors. Podcasts frame complex conflicts in 6-minute digestible outrage bites. And the effect consent doesn't feel manufactured. It feels natural, inevitable, righteous. But as a viewer, you must ask, have you seen Iranian civilians or just their missile silos? Have you heard debate or just patriotic calls to unity? Because when only one voice is amplified, consent isn't real. It's scripted. Now, we're not telling you what to believe. Maybe you do think Iran crossed a line. Maybe you do believe the U.S. had no choice. But we at VARINHIPI challenge you to ask, did we walk into this war with clarity or with narrative? Are we fighting to prevent escalation, or because escalation is already profitable? Was it about justice or leverage? We want to know what you think. Seriously, leave a comment. Do you believe this war was inevitable, or do you believe we were led here by design? Your voice matters more than ever. Algorithms can be manipulated, but public discussion is still powerful. Let's use it. Wars are never just about territory or revenge. They're about narratives, incentives, and belief. And if we're not careful, we may look back again and say we should have asked more questions when we still had the chance. They say it's a war between America and Iran, but if you zoom out, you'll see it's a chessboard. And America. It might not be the only one moving the pieces. From the headlines, you'd think this is simple. Iran strikes a U.S. base. America retaliates. End of story, right? But if war was that straightforward, history wouldn't be filled with proxy fights, hidden backers, and silent beneficiaries. This isn't just Washington versus Tehran. It's a stage where Russia, China, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Europe, and global corporations all have roles, some loud, some whispering. At VARINHIPI, we ask who really benefits when the U.S. enters a war, who profits when a region descends into chaos, and who keeps their hands clean while others bleed, Russia and China. The silent winners. Let's start with the two giants in the East. Russia and China didn't fire a single shot, but the moment the U.S. launched missiles into Iran, they smiled quietly behind closed doors. Russia's play, oil prices, surged above $120 per barrel. Russia, under heavy Western sanctions, suddenly sees billions in unexpected revenue. NATO's attention is diverted. Ukraine breathes a little easier. Moscow positions itself as Iran's behind-the-scenes supporter, offering radar systems and intelligence, gaining leverage without committing troops. China's move, it begins buying Iranian oil at discounted rates, avoiding dollar-based transactions. Beijing steps in, diplomatically offering to mediate talks, gaining international prestige. Most importantly, the U.S. is now distracted. That means less pressure in the South China Sea, less scrutiny over Taiwan. What better way to weaken your rival than to let him punch himself tired? And we want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Russia and China anticipated this? Was it luck or part of a broader, long-term strategy? Tell us in the comments. Israel, Saudi Arabia, in the regional balance. Now look at America's closest partners in the region. Israel has long viewed Iran as an existential threat. It has pushed for preemptive action for years. Now with the U.S. engaged directly, Israel can focus on neutralizing Hezbollah in the north, ramp up its own defense production and contracts, push forward on normalizing relations with Gulf countries under the banner of shared threat. But what happens if this war spins out of control? Will Israel be dragged into a broader regional war? Can it handle multi-front conflict if Iran mobilizes its proxy network? Saudi Arabia and the UAE have a different fear and stability. They want Iran contained, but not at the cost of missile strikes on oil infrastructure. So they walk a tightrope, quietly encouraging U.S. military pressure, publicly calling for restraint to appease domestic populations. In this game, even allies can pull the board in different directions. Europe's stuck in the middle. The European Union didn't ask for this war, but now it's facing the fallout. Energy markets in turmoil. Winter gas prices spike. Refugee fears return. Border security tightens. Internal political fractures widen between hawkish and dovish member states. Germany wants diplomacy. France wants a strategic containment. Eastern Europe quietly fears escalation with Russia. War in the Middle East always ripples into European homes. So we ask, should Europe be doing more to de-escalate? Or has it become too dependent on American military and energy power to say no? Let us know your take. the corporate war dividend. And then there's the quietest player of all corporations. Military contractors, Raytheon, Lockheed, Martin, and Northrop Grumman stocks soared after the first airstrikes. Pentagon contract requests increased. New drone systems, missile defense upgrades, satellite surveillance, all fast-tracked. Energy giants, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Aramco, all enjoy the chaos premium. Oil shocks mean more domestic drilling approvals, more profit from existing wells, more leverage over global prices. Media conglomerates' 24/7 coverage means higher ratings. War analysis breaking alerts live feeds from the front lines. It keeps audiences locked in. War isn't just politics, it's business, and business is booming. Now ask yourself, how many of these companies donate to both parties? How many lobby for foreign policy advice? And most of all, when profit aligns with conflict, who is left to advocate for peace? And the rest of us. Let's not forget the last group on the board, you, me, every civilian not invited to the war room. What happens when oil hits $6 a gallon? When your cousin gets deployed overseas? When your city cuts education funding to support national defense budgets? Wars are not fought just on battlefields. They are felt in wallets, in minds, and votes. Millions in the Middle East now face displacement. American families live with uncertainty. And while world leaders tweet sound bites, real people bleed, burn and bury. Final question, who set the board? The strike may have been real, the threat may be valid, but the timing, the silence from those who benefit, the alignment of corporate strategic and political incentives, that's not coincidence, that's coordination. VARINHIPI isn't saying this war was scripted, but we are saying this when everyone at the top gets richer, more powerful, or more secure because of war, then the truth isn't at the center of the board. It's buried beneath it. In the next part, we break it down. How does this war spiral? What paths are still left, and what happens when none of them lead to peace? Drop a comment. Who do you think benefits most from this war? Is America playing the game or being played? Your voice matters. Let it be heard. No war starts with a blueprint. It starts with a spark. But once that spark catches, it spreads into fire, and fire doesn't ask permission. That's where we are now. The U.S. has entered the war. Iran has struck back. The region is unraveling. So the real question isn't how the war started. It's what paths lie ahead and whether any of them lead out. At VARINHIPI, we've identified 3 primary paths forward. Each one is dangerous. Each one changes the world. Which one do you believe is unfolding? Path 1, total war. This is the nightmare scenario, the one no one wants to say out loud because deep down they know how close it is. In this scenario, Iran doubles down. It targets U.S. assets not only in the Gulf, but in Iraq, Syria, and possibly even the Mediterranean. Its missile arsenal is unleashed. Drone swarms are launched. Hormuz is shut down completely. The U.S. under pressure from both allies and domestic outrage escalates massively. Airstrikes flatten command centers. Cyber warfare cripples Iranian infrastructure. Troops are deployed, and then it spreads. Hezbollah opens a northern front against Israel. The Houthis strike Red Sea shipping lanes. Militias in Iraq hit American bases. This is no longer a tit for tat. This is war without boundaries. Global oil supply crashes. Markets plunge. The refugee crisis explodes. U.S. casualties mount. Iranian cities become battlegrounds. And every day the exit becomes harder to find. We've seen this before: Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. But this time the stakes are higher. Now ask yourself, do you believe Washington is prepared for a 10-year war? Does Iran even fear regime collapse or welcome martyrdom? How long before nuclear powers are drawn in? Path 2, the frozen conflict. Not every war burns hot. Some wars settle into a smoldering deadlock. In this path, the world steps back from the edge barely. After weeks of fighting, a fragile pause emerges. Maybe it's brokered by Oman or Qatar or even China. There's no peace treaty, just a chilling silence. American forces remain in the Gulf. Iran stays on high alert. But open combat slows. Instead, the conflict shifts underground. Proxy groups continue fighting. Cyber attacks increase. Assassinations and sabotage replace missiles and airstrikes. This becomes a war of attrition. Neither side wins. Both sides bleed, and the world adapts. Oil prices stabilize at a higher new normal. Military budgets swell. Citizens forget what peace even looked like. This scenario isn't as bloody as total war, but it's just as corrosive. It keeps the world on edge, and it rewards hardliners on both sides. Because in a frozen conflict, moderates are seen as weak, and fear becomes policy. Do you see this path forming? Let us know in the comments. Path 3: Nuclear brinkmanship. This is the most terrifying path, not because it guarantees destruction, but because it threatens it every day. Iran doesn't need a nuclear bomb to play this game. It only needs enough enriched uranium and enough secrecy to make Israel and the US nervous. Then the clock starts ticking. Israel, under existential pressure, signals its readiness to use tactical nukes. The US elevates its DEFCON status. Submarines shift. Radar systems go dark. One misinterpreted radar signal, one AI misfire, one deepfake video leak. That's all it takes. In this scenario, war becomes a game of chicken with atomic consequences, and the world watches breathless. Markets can't price in the risk. Diplomacy breaks down. Mutual paranoia becomes doctrine. We saw this in the Cold War, but back then at least there were hotlines, agreements, guardrails. In 2025, with AI and cyber manipulation, there are no rules, only reactions. So what do? Do we wait for someone to blink, or do we build a new doctrine fast? We want to hear your ideas. Genuinely. How do we avoid nuclear escalation? What safeguards should exist between AI-driven systems? Comment below. We'll feature the most insightful ones in our next episode. Which path are we on right now? Signs of all three are present. Missiles are flying. Path 1, negotiations are whispered. Path 2, enrichment levels are rising. Path 3, that's what makes this moment so fragile. Momentum matters, because each step we take narrows the exits. And if we don't choose a path, one will choose us. Final thought: wars don't need villains to start. They only need fear, pride, and a lack of imagination. So ask yourself, are our leaders acting with clarity or with impulse? Are we heading toward peace or just away from responsibility? At VARINHIPI, we believe the future isn't written, but the ink is drying fast. Speak now, comment, debate, share, and stay tuned for Part 6, the point of no return. How one wrong step ends the world we know. Let's not be silent observers to our own undoing. They say the scariest part of war is the first shot, but history says otherwise. The scariest part is when we realize we can't stop. Momentum has taken over. In the first days, it still felt like a decision. Leaders met behind closed doors. Journalists debated. Citizens protested or supported. The world held its breath. But now it feels different. Now it feels like we're not choosing escalation. We're just being pulled along by it. Iran strikes a base. America retaliates. Israel mobilizes. Russia steps up support. China positions naval forces. Oil hits $160 a barrel. No one wants to blink. No one wants to look weak. And no one knows how to make it stop. War is no longer an event. It's a system running on momentum, fear, and pride. Ask yourself, at what point does a war stop being about the reason it started? Are we already there? Tell us in the comments. The machines are moving faster than we are. We used to say the first casualty of war is the truth. But in 2025, the second casualty is control. AI now interprets battlefield data. AI recommends counterstrikes. AI monitors social sentiment, viral footage, energy flows. And here's the nightmare. Some systems are authorized to act faster than human review. A missile warning flashes red. The system flags it as credible. A drone scrambles. A counter-missile is launched. All within 7 seconds. No human signature required. Now layer this with deepfake technology. Imagine a fake video of a US president authorizing nuclear action. It spreads in seconds. Markets panic. Enemies prepare to retaliate. What if AI believes it's real? What if your enemies don't wait to find out? The tools of war no longer wait for humans to decide. That means peace is racing against a clock we don't control. Let us know what you think. Should AI be allowed to authorize military response? Have we built systems that now threaten us more than protect us? The invisible casualties: even before a nuclear weapon is launched, the world is already breaking. Financial collapse, emerging economies implode. Pakistan defaults. Egypt's currency devalues 70%. Global shipping slows. Inflation spikes, psychological collapse. Children in London, Tokyo and São Paulo go to school amid nuclear drills. Suicide hotlines in the US are overwhelmed. Depression, anxiety, and political radicalization explode on social media. Political collapse, governments crack down on dissent in the name of national security. Protests erupt in Paris, Seoul, New York. And conspiracy theories flood every platform, blaming everyone and no one. Civilization doesn't die with one big explosion. It dies in 1,000 quiet failures. What are you seeing in your country? Share your story in the comments. Let's not let silence be the next casualty. Fear has become strategy. When fear governs decisions, the window for peace closes fast. Right now, Iran believes if it stops now, it looks weak. The US believes if it hesitates, it invites more attacks. Israel believes this is its last chance to destroy Iran's nuclear capacity. Russia and China believe chaos is opportunity. Everyone sees retreat as surrender. Everyone believes the only way to survive is to push harder. That's how we all lose. The real point of no return isn't when bombs fall. It's when leaders believe they can't turn back, and that moment may already be behind us. Who profits if peace fails? It's easy to say war is a tragedy, but it's also a business. Right now, defense contractors see record-breaking stock prices. Media companies thrive on 24/7 coverage. Politicians pass bills that never would have passed in peace. Tech companies sell surveillance tools under the guise of security. Ask yourself, why are so many powerful people richer when we're scared? Why does the world move faster to fund weapons than to fund peace? We're not saying it's all planned, but we are saying this: if peace doesn't pay, war never ends. Sound off in the comments. What are the warning signs you see where you live? The final question. So here we are. We've covered why the US entered the war, the historical traps we've ignored, the invisible forces pushing us forward, and the paths that now lie ahead. But now comes the question we can't answer alone. Can this still be stopped? If yes, we need new ideas, new diplomacy, new courage. If no, we need to prepare for a world that's about to change forever. Maybe the war didn't begin with bombs. Maybe it began when we accepted fear as a policy. So we ask you, are we still in control of the game? Or are we just pieces now? Drop your answer below. Your voice might reach more people than you think. And if we can still speak still, think still, imagine something better, maybe it's not too late, not yet.